Hello History Addicts, welcome back to History Supply. I'm Rishi, and in this video we're going to be talking all about one of the founding documents of New Zealand, the Treaty of Waitangi. So let's go. Before we wade into the controversy surrounding the Treaty of Waitangi, let's look at what we know for sure. It was an agreement between Northern Maori leaders and representative of the British Crown, Lieutenant Governor William Hobson on the other side. It was first signed at Waitangi in the Bay of Islands, hence the name. And after that, over the course of the next few months, it was signed at various other locations across the islands. What exactly did the treaty say? And that, my friends, is where the entire controversy begins. The instructions that William Hobson received went a little something like this. Penrose, absolutely no problem, man. New Zealand. Hey, do you have any draft of any treaty that I could take to them? Seeing like you've got so many lawyers over here and all. No, just go land up over there. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Okay then, well, that's cool. I guess I'll just head on over to New Zealand then. Okay, bye. Well, here I am in New Zealand. I'll just get the British resident James Busby and my secretary to help me write the treaty. That should do it. The entire treaty was finished in just 3 days. And then, in the grand tradition of students who finish all their work at the last moment, it was translated into Maori just the night before. This just goes to show, never put off translating an international treaty into a language which you're just barely aware of until the last minute. If the Maori and the English had had a real conversation about the treaty before signing it, which obviously did not happen, then this is probably something like how it would have gone down. Okay, gentlemen. The Queen promises to protect Maori interests from the encroaching British settlement, provide for British settlement, and establish a government to maintain peace and order. In this first article, you all the Maori leaders, you also give the Queen all rights and powers of sovereignty over the land. So the Queen promises to provide a government while securing tribal rangatiratanga, which means the autonomy of the tribal chief and Maori land ownership, right? In the second article, Maori leaders and people, collectively and individually, are confirmed and guaranteed exclusive and undisturbed possession of their lands and estates, forests, fisheries, and other properties. Maori leaders also agree to the Crown's exclusive right to purchase their land. This Maori text, Maori leaders give the Queen Te Kawanatanga Katoa, or the complete government over their land. The word sovereignty doesn't really exist in the Maori language, at least right now. These had authority over their own areas, but there was no one central ruler or king of all of New Zealand. Maori believed that they were entering into some kind of power sharing agreement in which they would still maintain their tribal autonomy. What they were going to do was cede a right of governance to the Queen in exchange for protection. The Maori chiefs, such as myself, who are entering into this Treaty of Waitangi, are probably expecting to enter into some kind of agreement or partnership with the Crown. Maori are guaranteed Te Tino Rangatiratanga, or the unqualified exercise of their chieftainship over their lands, villages, and properties and all other treasures or taonga. Maori also agreed to give the Crown the right to first purchase land. Some Maori and British sources later commented that they expected that the Maori would give the Crown the first right to buy land, instead of an exclusive right to buy land. In the third article, the Crown gives an assurance that Maori would have the Queen's protection and all rights accorded to British subjects. Finally, in this third article, we have the most similar translation of them all. So the question is, why did the British want this treaty? So when Hobson would subsequently make a declaration of British sovereignty over New Zealand in May 1840, the Maori people would not feel that their rights were being ignored. The treaty would also provide for British settlement. Speculators were buying up large amounts of land in New Zealand, and the London-based New Zealand Company had massive plans for organized settlement in New Zealand. The British also signed the treaty so that they could protect Maori people from the encroaching British settlements. It was also to maintain law and order, because there were complaints of lawlessness in British settlements on New Zealand itself. Why did the Maori people want to sign the treaty? Well, they wanted the British to govern and provide law and order. Also, they wanted controls on sales of land to other Europeans, and they also wanted controls on European settlers. The French were also interested in New Zealand, and the Maori people were afraid that if they did not side with the British, they may go the way of the French Polynesians. The Maori tribal chiefs were also encouraged by the English missionaries, who believed that such a treaty would be invaluable assistance for the future welfare of Maori people if there was future English settlement. As members of a predominantly oral society into which writing had just recently been introduced, the tribal chiefs would have placed greater emphasis on what Hobson was saying at the time of the treaty, rather than what was actually written on it. Finally, the failure of the Maori text to accurately convey what exactly the English text was saying probably was also a factor in allowing the Maoris to sign up on that treaty. No discussion of the Treaty of Waitangi is complete without a discussion of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, when you don't take it too literally. Sometimes the Treaty of Waitangi is referred to in Acts of Parliament, but even then, the treaty is not being referred to itself, but rather the principles espoused in that treaty. The Waitangi Tribunal, into which we'll go into greater depth later on, has exclusive power now to determine what exactly the treaty means and to reconcile any differences between the two texts, the Maori one and the English one. You can follow the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi by following the 3 P's, which is protection, participation, and partnership. Participation means everyone, whether you're Maori or white or anyone, participates in the nation of New Zealand. Partnership means a place where the tribal leaders, the government of New Zealand and the Crown would all have a place. Now it's time for a history trivia segment. The Treaty of Waitangi is considered a founding document of New Zealand. It's almost like a constitution in one sense. Every year, New Zealand celebrates Waitangi Day, which celebrates the writing and the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. If you're from New Zealand, drop a comment below to tell us how relevant the Treaty of Waitangi is to daily life. Another fun fact is, of the 600 plus Rangatira, or Maori tribal chiefs, only 12 signed the written documents in the Latin alphabet. A lot of them just marked it with an X, and some of them even identified themselves by drawing parts of their moko, or facial tattoos. In 1997, the Treaty of Waitangi was inscribed in the UNESCO World Register of Historically Important Documents. So now, the aftermath of the treaty. What happened after the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi? What were its effects? There were first years of treaty violations, starting in the 19th century to the 20th century and possibly even into the 21st century. In 1877, a court case judgment declared the treaty as a simple nullity. Violations of the treaty and conflict over the meanings of the various treaties has led to a principal reason of various New Zealand wars, such as the Flagstaff War, being directly attributable to the Treaty of Waitangi. In 1975, the Parliament of New Zealand passed the Treaty of Waitangi Act. Waitangi Tribunal is a permanent commission of inquiry tasked with researching breaches of the treaty by the Crown by New Zealand and suggesting possible means of redress or possible solutions to the problems that have been caused. Recommendations of the tribunal are not binding on the British Crown itself. But, and this is a big but here, settlements totaling over 1 billion have been awarded to Maori groups over the years. When the tribunal was first created, its jurisdiction only extended from 1975 onwards, severely restricting its power. However, in 1985, the jurisdiction of the tribunal was significantly extended, ranging all the way from the writing of the treaty, all the way to the present. Which version was correct in the end? Many academics argue that due to the significant differences between the English version and the Maori version, they are not one, but 2 separate treaties. And they would say that the Waitangi one or the Maori one should be given more significance than the English one. This is because the Maori version had the most signatories. The Waitangi Tribunal, which ultimately has power to decide which is which, does give more significance and more attribution to the treaty signed in Maori. So for now at least, the Maori version is more important, if not the correct version. History Addicts, the Treaty of Waitangi. Please like and subscribe because it means a lot to me personally. It allows me to keep producing videos like these. Thank you for watching and I'll catch you next time.